Welcome back. This is a lecture for Chapter 2, Sources of Information, Why Research is Best and How to Find It. So the title of the chapter gives us a good idea of what this chapter is about. We're going to talk about different sources of information and why research is often the best way of understanding something. So overall, we're going to talk about your experience and why that's not always great, your intuition, why that's not always great. Trust in authorities is usually risky. And at the very end, we're going to talk about a little bit about finding and reading research. The lecture after this one will actually be about doing a literature search, and so it's going to provide more information about how to find research here at USU. So stay tuned for that. So first, your experience doesn't have a comparison group. That can be really problematic, as any individual has seen. There's some things that seem to work for some people and some things that don't. And if you don't have a comparison group, you don't really know how often it's working for individuals and how often it's not. And you don't know really if it works at all if you don't have someone that isn't receiving the treatment. So a comparison group, for example, with this picture right here on the right, you have what's called kinesio tape. Individuals that use it believe that it strengthens their knee in some way and it helps them either with swelling or with pain. The issue is an individual may wear it and may feel better, but can we say that it was a tape? Can we say that it was just a really good day for their joints? Maybe it was the weather, maybe it was the pressure outside, the barometric pressure. It's really hard to tell because we don't have someone to compare with. If we had individuals to compare with, so people that wore the tape and people that didn't, in the same race, we would be able to compare much better. So other examples of experience that can kind of lead you astray is things like, I've used tanning beds for 10 years and I have no skin cancer. Does that mean that tanning beds don't cause skin cancer? Another one, when I'm mad, I feel so much better after I vent my feelings. Sometimes that's, I need to punch something, I need to say something mean on Twitter, whatever it is. The issue is those experiences are real, and I don't want you to think otherwise. However, it does have shortcomings. The first one we talked about, comparison group, but another one's confounding. So you may have tried something and it seemed to work. That could be due to a number of other factors, not the thing that you tried. Just due to chance, it just happened to be at the same time. These are things that research can address. As we get more into this class, we'll see how. But that is one reason why research can be better than experience. Another thing research can address is that the cause-effect relationships that exist in the world are probabilistic. Every time I go tanning, do I get skin cancer? No, of course not. No one would do it. But does tanning cause cancer? The answer is yes. So it doesn't happen every time and to everybody, but it still can be a cause of something else. So tanning can still cause cancer. So when we talk about comparison group, one of the infamous examples of just using experience and not actually making a comparison was bloodletting. It was a horrible practice where you just let out blood when you were sick. And the doctors, due to their experience, thought it was working. And that may have been because they only interacted with the ones that healed. So the ones that healed were the ones that were like, hey, thank you for helping me, I'm better now. Those that died may not have had any contact in any way with a doctor again, with family or friends. And so easily the doctor could only see possibly the people that were healed. Regardless of the reason, they never did this comparison group until much later. And a comparison group allows you to see what would have happened if we didn't do the treatment. So it allows us to ask the question, this happens when we do the treatment, what happens when we don't, and we can make a direct comparison. The comparison group is often called a control group. It's usually a group that doesn't receive something that you're doing. Regardless of what you call it, the key is that they are comparable. You need the groups to be able to be comparable in terms of their characteristics, their behavior, stuff like that. So when we talk about confounded, a confound is an alternative explanation for an outcome. So something else that could have caused the outcome. So what can we do about those? So for example, people can get lung cancer even if they don't smoke. But we know that smoking is a cause of lung cancer. So we need to control for the fact that we know that some lung cancer just happens for other reasons. And so we would need to control for that. One way is to isolate variables using an experiment. Scientists do this by just changing one factor. So they would make, this is unethical, but they would make one person smoke and one person not and compare. That was actually one issue that delayed our understanding of smoking, was because we couldn't ethically do that. But there's a lot of things we can do. We can see, does venting your frustration actually help you? So in Bushman's 2002 study, they looked at the effect of catharsis on aggression, and they made a systematic comparison that controlled for potential confounds, which is what you're always aiming for in experimental research. And so this figure shows the group that sat quietly were not very aggressive to a partner after. Those that let out their anger just punching a bag, so exercise, they didn't show much change. They weren't more aggressive or less. They were right around average. If they were punching a bag and it was a person that they were punching, in this case Steve, this Steve partner, they were actually more aggressive on average than the other groups. So just by making this comparison where we compare a group that sits quietly, one that just punches a bag but it's not aimed at a person, and then one that is aimed at a person, that helps us understand what the effect of actually punching a bag of someone's face does. If we don't have a comparison group, we just can't make that conclusion. So the idea that research is probabilistic, it means its findings, so whenever we're looking at a cause-effect, we're not expecting it to explain all the cases all the time. There are always going to be exceptions. So like tanning beds and cancer, not everyone that tans is going to end up with cancer, but they are at higher risk. It's more probable that they will have cancer. Also, there's other ways that you can get cancer, and it might not be from tanning. So not only does the effect not always cause the outcome, but there's multiple causes that can exist for a single outcome as well. You can start to see how experience can be really tough to figure out cause and effect. It's even tough to do when we can tightly control the situation, but in our experience, we usually can't. And that is why research can be really valuable compared to experience. When it comes to research versus your intuition, behavioral economics is really cool this way. I'm not going to show this talk right here. It's a TED talk. Please go to it. It's a really interesting one about behavioral economics. And it shows a couple ways we are biased, ways that we're totally influenced by other things. So even when we don't feel biased, we may be influenced by things that we don't even realize are there. So this is not to say intuition is always wrong, but it is to say that it is risky. So in the book, they go into a number of ways that our intuition can be biased. One is being swayed by a good story. A good story is really influential. Being persuaded by what easily comes to mind. If it's easy to remember it, we're going to think that it's more common. Failing to think about what we cannot see. That is probably one of the most difficult things, is we don't know what we don't know. Focusing on the evidence we like best. The evidence that fits our worldview is usually the stuff we want to hold on to. The last one is being biased about being biased. Usually we think that we're not as biased as we truly are. So we talked about this one, being swayed by a good story. It is so easy to accept a conclusion because it sounds really good, or it makes sense, or there's a lot of emotion tied to it. It's really easy to fall for that. And marketers and others will use that to their advantage. So another one, it's called the availability heuristic. So a heuristic is a shortcut. It's a shortcut for us to understand how common things are, what is most likely. And so we can really be biased by just what comes to mind the easiest. So one example is we might think shark attacks are really common because those are scary, they're emotion filled, and they're ones that we can think about because they're in the news. But in fact, they're actually really, really rare. Being killed by a shark is about 1 in 3.7 million. You're much more likely just to die in your bathtub, which is about 1 in 800,000. But someone dying in a bathtub is not as emotionally charged usually as hearing about a shark attack. So on this slide, if you look quickly, which color of candy is most common in this bowl? So if you looked really quick, you might have thought yellow, red, or orange. But it's because those are easy to see. That blue is actually the most common, but it's a blue bowl. And so it doesn't stand out as much, and it's harder to acknowledge that there's a lot of them. In my experience, I really thought there was a lot of yellow. Those stick out quite a bit for me. So that's the availability heuristic. Another way is failing to think about what we cannot see. This is very difficult. So the present bias, so what is in front of us, around us, those are the things that we see and we think is common, we think is how things work. But we can't account for what we can't see. So intuition and experience really struggle here. Another way is focusing on the evidence we like best. This is called confirmation bias. This one is very difficult to overcome. This one, you see individuals, you hold on to the evidence that fits what you believed before. And this is often because it's difficult to have what's called the cognitive dissonance. That's when we believe one thing, but we're seeing something else. And so they are not congruent with each other. They don't go together. So what we do naturally is we find the stuff that actually agrees with our worldview. Another one, bias about being biased. Bias blind spot is what it's called. And this is where we don't even realize that we're biased when we think we are clearly not. This is really common, and it's usually something we don't even think about. So those are just some of the ways that intuition can get thrown off. These are things that happen to us naturally. We don't even give them any thought, they just happen. And if we're not careful, they can really impact our decisions. They can impact our behavior. Nice thing is if we do research correctly, we can remove all of these biases. Another one which is difficult and sometimes frustrating is that we naturally trust authorities on a subject. And these authorities don't necessarily have to be experts in the field. Often you come across individuals who are celebrities and they pick up a certain movement, and suddenly people believe in the movement because a celebrity believes it. But that individual actually doesn't have any real backing. There's no evidence backing their claims. And so you have to be careful when you hear something on a podcast, read something on Twitter, even if it is someone that seems smart and is well versed. You always got to look at the evidence that they actually have and look at any evidence that goes against them. Often the authorities in an area, they're not going to present the information that doesn't agree with their conclusions. So you could read something that they wrote and feel very convinced because they'll present all the information in favor of it. But you need to look at what am I missing? We don't want to get pulled into that this idea of either confirmation bias or present bias, where we don't know what we cannot see. If we don't look into things, we don't know what we're missing. And if what they are saying, the authority, fits our worldview, it's going to be really hard to go against it. So in this example, Jenny McCarthy, she's an actress and a celebrity. She claimed that giving childhood vaccines later in life is better because it would prevent autism disorders in kids. However, the research consistently shows that is not the case. Vaccines do not cause autism. They do not increase the risk of autism. So a lot of people believe the movement, and there's been a lot of kids that don't get vaccines. And if you've been following the news, this has been very problematic. Things like measles are coming back that we thought was totally eradicated from the US. So trusting authorities can be very risky. So the last part, the book presents some ways to understanding research. Like I mentioned before, I'm going to go into more detail in a separate lecture about how to actually do this. In general, we want to consult scientific sources. So we don't want to go to mainstream sources in the news or in social media. We want to go to the actual scientific source. So we'll go into how to find that in the next lecture. So this diagram I really like. It is a quick summary of what this chapter has been about. So we can believe things based on a number of reasons. We can follow the pink direction based on experience. We can go based on intuition. We can go based on authority. Or we can base it on research. And even here, there's going to be lots of resources that we can use, and some are going to be better than others. So on this side, we have a few other ways to get scientific research and understanding of it. This is usually for a popular audience. It's to sell books, they're in magazines. These can be very good, but often these also take shortcuts and they don't present all the information that led to a conclusion. And that's where this side really comes in handy. So for us, we're going to focus on going all the way down here to journal articles. So there's empirical articles and review articles. I'll talk about those in the next lecture. There's also edited books. These are special ones that are scientific books, not popular books that talk about science, but actually written by scientists. And things like textbooks, like our textbook. These are places where you can find more transparent, concrete science. So what we're going to focus on in the next lecture will be finding these two things: empirical journal articles and review journal articles. We're going to focus first on review. If you can find these usually give you more information quickly. Empirical articles are usually the source, the original source of the information, and those are really good to get to know, although sometimes they can be difficult to read if you don't know much about the area yet. Edited books and full-length books, often we can get those through the library. But usually, for this class at least, we're going to do a lot of stuff here. If you do find a good book for it, do not be shy. Use that book for one of your sources. So when we do go into it, we will talk about PsycInfo, Google Scholar, and Scopus. These are databases that will allow us to access research articles based on some search criteria. So we're going to come back to this slide when we're talking about finding research. These are really nice tips. So find out how psychologists talk about your question. If you don't know which word to look up, it's very difficult to know how to find things. There's some nice ways to get all the related terms. So if you use an asterisk, you can get all the things that are adolescents, and adolescent. If you get too many articles, you can use or too few hits, you can use or to give you more. If you get too many, you can use and to restrict it. Often, if you can't find the ones you're looking for, sometimes you actually can look in a different article's references. So there may be an article that looks like it's talking about what you want, but it's not quite it. You can look at their references and see who has cited them, and sometimes, or who they're citing, and see other articles that are related. Another thing I'm going to talk about in the next lecture more thoroughly is understanding each part of an article. In general, there's the abstract, the introduction, the method, the results, the discussion, and the references. Each of those give you different pieces of information. Often we're going to focus on the abstract at the very first. And then once we understand what it's about, we're going to try to understand the method and the results. And then from there, usually the introduction gives us more information, more articles to look at, and the discussion usually ties the results back into the rest of the literature. So when you're looking into journal articles and even chapters and review articles, first thing you want to consider is, what is the argument? What are they trying to claim? Once you understand what they're claiming, the next step is always, what is the evidence to support that claim? Sometimes the evidence is going to be really strong, sometimes it's going to be weak. In this class, we're going to talk about ways to better assess how to judge the evidence. Does it look like they were able to control for confounders? Does it look like they were able to control for any other biases? Are their measures good? Things like that. So that is chapter 2. Watch the next lecture. We're going to be talking about how to find the research articles, which is really important for your literature review assignment, which will be due in just a couple weeks.